I think The Giver is one of the most important books that's been published in the last half century, perhaps last century for children. It is one of those books that has not only an amazing story of a kiddo who is trying to find himself in a culture which is not helping him do that, in fact is hindering him from doing that, and who has to make huge decisions. He has to make a decision that will go against his culture, but which he knows from his heart is the right decision.
You start to read it and you think, what a perfect society. No pain, no war, no bad memories. And you realize there is no perfect society, that we as human beings are complex, societies are complex. And in the case of The Giver, you see that, yes, while there's no pain, no war, no bad memories, there's also no joy. And that's pretty powerful.
Lois was a master at vignettes and family relationships and interpersonal exchanges. And here she wrote something that had depended on plot. It was a book of ideas. It was a book of concepts completely. In a genre she'd never written in, and yet it seemed to me that she'd gotten it so right.
Her writing was so slender and so precise that there was no way that you could see through the screen of the writing to get to any cracks in the outside world, whether they be bookish cracks to a bookish world or just cracks in the surface of the narrative. It's seamless.
The Giver for me is this series of unveilings. You know, there's just as each new concept becomes clear to the reader, there's these building moments of oh, right?
Why didn't somebody write this when I was younger? And it just resonated with me and made me think about so much about choice and freedom and what our world might be like if we don't pay attention to what's going on.
This book, from beginning to end, is just seamless. It's perfect. Not a wasted word, not a throwaway scene, nothing. And that's part of my attraction, I think, to this novel so many years after its publication.
And I remember sitting there in the afternoon light and finishing the book and thinking, this is going to be probably the most important book you're going to look at. One of the few really great books you're ever going to see.
All of us have that one book. The book that you read and you realize when you're finished that you have experienced a psychic change. Something is different in you. And for me, that book is The Giver. I remember reading it for the first time and finishing it and just kind of letting out this heavy breath like, whoa, wow.
I read The Giver aloud to our sons, our twin sons. They were probably about 11 or 12 years old when I read it to them. And at that time I was looking for books, you know, they were brown boys, and so I often tried to look for books that would reflect their experience. What I found with The Giver is that it did reflect their experience. Jonas is not an Indian kid, and yet his struggle to fight conformity, his coming of age, his quest to keep old memories alive, all of that were things our boys were going through.
The first time I read The Giver by Lois Lowry, I didn't finish it. I actually closed it and put it back on my nightstand because I was so unsettled by it.
The first time I read The Giver, my dad actually read it aloud to me, and then I read it in class the next year, and then I read it on my own the year after that. And clearly, it made a huge impression on me because once a year was absolutely mandatory reading.
The Giver is the only book that I remember reading from middle school. It was a book the one book that we all read. We read it together as a class, and I remember it was the only time in my whole middle school life where the book that we were reading in class was taken to the lunchroom. Usually the lunchroom was reserved for football and baseball and girls, but that was the first time and the only time where I remember that what was happening in the book was something that we felt we needed to talk about after class.
The images in the book were so haunting for me that they both compelled me to continue reading eventually and also made me really think how important it was for kids to read about things that are unsettling so that they can start to process for themselves what would a world be like with these kind of constraints.
My memory of reading The Giver for the first time is a wonderful one. We got an arc of The Giver at the Texas Library Association conference, but there was only one arc left, and there were two of us. And so my colleague Rosemary Chance took it, and we decided we would read it aloud to one another as we drove home from San Antonio. So we get in the car, we're driving, Rosemary starts the reading, we decide we need to stop for lunch. We get out of the car, we go into the restaurant with the book in hand. Over lunch, we read it back and forth to one another, with people in the restaurant staring at us thinking, why are they reading aloud to one another? We got all the way back to Rosemary's house, I think, and we had not finished the last 3 chapters. And Rosemary said, well, I'm holding it, so I get to take it for the weekend. And she did. Reluctantly, I let her take it for the weekend. We got to work Monday morning. She came rushing into my office, threw the book down on the desk and said, drop everything, finish reading it, we need to talk.
My favorite scene from The Giver is definitely the ceremony of 12. That is the moment when each child who's turning 12 is to get their assignment. They're waiting for their fate. What are they going to do for the rest of their lives?
The part in The Giver that really stands out to me whenever I think about the book and talk about the book are Jonas's rules that he gets once he has his assignment. And of all of the rules, that last one, number 8, is you may lie. And I think that it's so revelatory for him and so frightening. And you know, I think all kids go through this period in time where they realize that not everybody is telling the truth all the time. And it's shocking in real life, but then to see it in this wholly manufactured society, to learn that things are not what they seem, it's chilling.
My now 12-year-old daughter read The Giver for the first time. She loves dystopian, and I finally told her, Molly, if you're gonna read all dystopian, you have to read the book that started it. And I handed her The Giver, and all she wanted to know was, Mom, what's release? What's release? What's release? And I said, Molly, I can't tell you. You just have to keep reading. And when she finally got to that scene, and if you've read The Giver, you know that scene. And she came up to me, she's like, Mom, why didn't you tell me this is horrible? How could they do that? And I said, because Molly, if I would have told you, you wouldn't have had that moment. And she smiled.
When he finally realizes what's going on with a release and what that really means and what his father has been involved in, you experience that scene on such an emotional level. You're feeling it just as much as Jonas is.
I think my favorite moment is when Jonas realizes what's going to happen to Gabriel. I think it's really important to understand that everything leading up to that point has just been almost like a game. And he's been playing with the rules and trying to figure out how he fits in. So I think clarifying that with kids and having them understand, I mean, the discussions around that particular scene were really intense.
When Jonas learns about war, that is a powerful, powerful scene. And even talking about it right now, I can feel that same kind of reaction.
The favorite moment was when he discovered the color red. And it was the red of the apple, the red of the sled, I believe, and the red of Fiona's hair. And the three items she chose, the apple, which to me that's early childhood, and the sled, that's kind of, you know, the activity, the energy of middle childhood, and then a girl's hair, because the stirrings have begun, right? Genius. And just, I'm getting goosebumps. Because there's something about that color and the insertion of color, and that a child wouldn't know color, and now he does.
I hope that kids read The Giver and cherish the things that they have, because it's so easy in life to think about the things that we don't have and the things that are bad about our life. But for me, and I hope for kids too, that The Giver helps us to cherish those and to appreciate the things that we do have.
One of the reasons I think The Giver is such a timeless book and why children should still read it is because I think that children deserve and need powerful reading experiences where they're shown great literature, where they're pushed to ask questions, and The Giver asks a lot of tough questions. It's a very provocative book. Really just push your thinking and make you question things like freedom and safety and family and love in ways that no other book like it does.
The other thing that this book shows is that books for young readers can deal with the most important issues of our time in very, very serious ways. In this particular one, you have issues of euthanasia, which are raised completely unpreacherly-like, which are raised in the context of the story. And a reader has to confront those. The way we treat the elderly, a reader must confront those.
And this book really shows you that you can be strong and you can be brave by being yourself and going after the truth.
I think the true thing about The Giver is that it does stand the test of time, that it is so ubiquitous. Many of the ideas in it are the kinds of things that we would have seen in the 16th or 17th century, and so many of them still hold true today in the 21st century. And I think it's that universal quality that makes it such a strong piece of what we have in the literary canon for young people today.
It's sort of like the way light hits a painting. You see it one way, one moment, and then you see it another way the next time you read it. And this is why, 5th, 6th, 7th grade teachers have loved bringing this book into the classroom year after year after year.
Lois Lowry's Newbery speech, she reflected that a lot of people felt the ending to The Giver was ambiguous, and she said she wanted it to feel that way. And, working with young people, so often they want the ends of their books to have a nice, neat resolution at the end. And so The Giver is often one of the first books they read that doesn't end neatly like that. And they don't always know how to handle it. It's really kind of fascinating to watch. They finish it and then, well, what happened? What happened? They want to know. And the idea that Lois Lowry would leave it to the reader to figure out what happened really surprises them.
I had thought that I was a very specific type of reader and that there were only certain types of books that I liked to read. And The Giver was nothing like any of those. And suddenly all of these doors opened that had been closed before. And I became a much stronger reader, a much more curious reader, a much more adventurous reader. And I attribute a lot of my adult reading to what I got out of The Giver.
As an adult, of course, I have a longer list of books to speculate on, probably, than young readers. But even if they only have The Giver, if only their utopic reading list includes that one book is sufficient to really cause a young reader to really reverberate with a lot of questions about what they would do in that situation.
There are a lot of grown-ups who've never read The Giver. And I say to those adults, if you're going to read one book that is supposedly for young readers, and I believe that The Giver is for every reader, but if you're going to read the one book, read The Giver. I think it's interesting that the last word of the entire novel is echo, and that's what The Giver gives. It reverberates, it stays with you, it has an echo. And I say to everyone, whether you're a reader who's 12 or 90, that is the power of The Giver. It will ring in your thoughts long after you have finished the book.
I don't think it's important for young people to read The Giver. I think it's important for all people to read The Giver. I think it's a magnificent book to be shared within families, especially around the age, 11, 12. But I think also you should read it again when you're 17. And then you should really read it when you're 35. And then, like 70, 75, you should treat yourself to reading it again and maybe read it out loud and record it for your grandchildren. Because it's one of those books that contains such wisdom, and true wisdom keeps unfolding, and you learn lessons within a new context with each new chapter of life that you go through. So this might be the book for the ages.